Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tech Justice Podcast. This is a show about technology, society, ethics, and everything in between. I'm Murat.
And I'm Jaden. This episode is the third and final episode in our Tech Justice series on recommendation algorithms and misinformation. Last episode, we dove into the complications that recommendation algorithms have created in spreading misinformation. In this episode, we'll continue our discussion of these problems by looking at some possible solutions.
This is Recommended Lies. In the last episode, we ended at the beginning of a discussion about what exactly we can do to stop or at least curb the tendency of recommendation algorithms to spread misinformation at rates that, in recent years, have become accelerated to the point that misinformation and fake news are a legitimate threat to the state of our society. And Jaden, I do believe that you had some ideas in mind?
Yeah, I had a few improvements in mind, and I think it'd be best to break these down into improvements in the tech industry, policy and legislation, and society. Let's start by looking at some tech industry improvements. When I think about the tech industry being involved in misinformation, companies like Meta, TikTok, Google, and also Amazon to a lesser extent are the main ones that come to mind. I think one of the more obvious remedies would be to alter the design of recommendation algorithms to remove the biases for sensational and political content.
But then that immediately runs into the issue of market fundamentalism, right? The companies won't willingly subvert their ability to make a profit off their users by not showing them political content anymore. So instead, a better solution might be to keep those biases, but then to implement more algorithmic transparency. Basically, make it so that the process, logic, and outcomes of an algorithm can be easily understood and explained.
Right, because currently a lot, if not all these algorithms, work as black boxes, where a computer has decided an optimal method of pairing users with content. And oftentimes these algorithms are hidden as trade secrets.
Exactly. So by opening this black box up a little bit, researchers and independent parties can begin to analyze and better understand what is going on when content gets ranked and recommended. And so we can get a better sense of when things may be going wrong. Let's think about how misinformation thrives again. Usually it starts with just a few seeds of rumor or conspiracy. But as it is shared, recommended, and spreads over a wider area, it gains a virality that has an effect almost like a game of telephone. But if the driving force behind that virality is transparent, then we can start answering questions like why was this boosted and what kinds of content gets pushed harder, without having to rely on assumptions of what is going on behind closed doors of megacorporations.
This would also mean that the companies would actually be held accountable, right? Currently, companies have a shroud of plausible deniability that it was the algorithm doing stuff, not us. But if there was a system in place for auditing these algorithms, we could see whether or not they actually have any active or preventative safeguards in place to prevent the spread of misinformation, either by people or by the algorithm themselves.
Okay, but what if companies don't want to make their algorithms public? Then what? Who's going to force them to do what's in the public interest?
This is where government policy implementation will come in to enforce these transparency efforts. Because if we know anything about the government, it's that it's historically been pretty decent at reining in large corporations, at least until recently. One thing that could work on a policy level is, of course, mandating algorithmic transparency. But another would be design mandates requiring that companies intentionally build algorithms that inhibit or give friction to the spread of false information.
Yeah, but I kind of wonder, what if hypothetically both the tech companies and the government were on the side of deregulation and reducing the oversight that the government has over these tech companies? Or even worse, what if the government itself has a propensity to mold the truth and make up narratives that fit its interests, even if they're not factually accurate? Then what's stopping them from just using their outsized power to make the problem worse by actively promoting the spread of their misinformation or propaganda to the masses through altered recommendation algorithms?
Yeah, that actually doesn't sound too impossible given the current state of things. I think a good connection to make that might help us address this is to some ideas from Dr. Ben Green. He is an assistant professor at the University of Michigan School of Information and a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. In his article titled Data Science as Political Action, Green dives deeper into the ideas of reforms, specifically splitting them into two types: reformist reforms and non-reformist reforms, an idea pioneered by social philosopher Andre Gores. Green describes that, quote, reformist reformers start from existing systems and strive to improve them, while non-reformist reformers start from a set of desired social conditions and seek ways to attain them, unquote. He highlights the importance of thinking from the perspective of social change rather than thinking from within the current system. In many cases of technology, including recommendation algorithms, the system, of course, is capitalism and market fundamentalism. By thinking of social solutions outside of these existing systems, we can produce solutions that actually benefit all people and better prevent the spread of misinformation.
Absolutely. So, by implementing reforms, by primarily focusing on addressing the problem at hand and then minimizing your focus on the constraints applied by the status quo, we can more effectively address our societal problems in ways that are more sustainable and have more longevity. One drastic example of a non-reformist reform that comes to my mind applied to our recommendation systems could be a total removal of them from websites and apps. This would be non-reformist because it totally ignores the profit motive, and many would argue that would actively make the user experience of social media worse because they'd get recommended worse items. If this was done, the only way that information could be spread through social media is if it was shared directly via peer-to-peer communication, if you are following someone, if you're subscribed to their page, or if you're actively searching for information by typing into a search box. This would definitely provide a lot of attrition to the rate of misinformation spread, but it would also hinder the spread of factual information at the same time. Another downside is that when you limit people's feeds to their existing contacts and followed pages, you definitely run a major risk of creating information bubbles, which would be a breeding ground for conspiracy and fake news.
On the flip side, an example of a reformist reform that has already been implemented are community notes or content labels that inform social media users that a certain piece of information or content may not be supported by fact. While helping users to avoid being misled by misinformation, this still does not completely solve the problem of misinformation being spread readily online by both recommendation algorithms and other users.
Yeah, those definitely haven't helped Twitter a whole bunch recently. Let's be honest. So then it seems like we might need something in the middle. A reform that doesn't totally ignore the social context in which it is trying to be implemented, but also doesn't provide a band-aid solution to the problem. One reform that we think could fit this bill is a larger focus on educating people on topics like media literacy and critical thinking. Specifically, these topics should be taught and tested in our schools to ensure that the future users of social media are better able to distinguish fact from fiction. Additionally, this would reduce the spread of misinformation from human sources, as a better educated populace would theoretically be less willing to spread or believe in lies.
From this frame of mind and working from a non-reformist reform perspective, we can see how advocating for better education and spreading truthful, factual information is so important. To better support these efforts, people could come together to form advocacy groups to hold tech companies accountable in building recommendation algorithms that do hinder the spread of misinformation.
One other thing that's on my mind is that looking at the history of how information has been disseminated, traditionally we see it being spread through journalism. Unlike recommendation algorithms, journalists have a strict code of ethics and integrity, and it's written in the preamble of the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, quote, "Ethical journalism strives to ensure the free exchange of information that is accurate, fair, and thorough. An ethical journalist acts with integrity," unquote. It is mandated that journalists report information that is, to the best of their knowledge, true and unmodified.
I think social media companies should be required to follow similar requirements when it comes to disseminating information online via their recommendation algorithms. In ensuring that information that is spread online is fair and truthful, we can avoid the mass misinformation and conspiracy theories we see today.
Yeah, this would be great. While it may be difficult, I imagine that a decent way to do this would be to require that all social media posts containing claims of any sort must have a direct link to a scientific paper or primary source article so that the information that is shared can be traced. A properly designed program can easily compare what's being said in a post versus what is being said in a journal, and thus can discern if the source information is being accurately represented in its dissemination. One issue I immediately see with this, though, is that a lot of the time, especially in developing situations, a lot of people may have primary source information that they want to share on social media, but wouldn't be able to under this structure because journalists haven't verified the information yet. I think that this, while inconvenient, is a small price to pay for keeping misinformation away from the recommendation algorithms. A return to a slower, more methodical news cycle would definitely reduce the amount of misinformation that gets spread online.
Yeah, I think I definitely enjoy going back to a time where there wasn't a new breaking headline every 10 minutes, which reminds me of the old saying, no news is good news. But even if such a solution were to be implemented, I think we'd still have a relatively fast rate of information spread, as the speed of communication has been exponentially improved by the internet. One other thing I like about this solution is that it will increase our society's dependence on journalists and academic researchers, both of which are currently the targets of large federal funding cuts and outsized public hostility.
Okay, so to wrap this up, we started with this question: what are recommendation algorithms? And from there, we learned about their history and how they prioritize shocking, politically charged, and emotional material when matching users with content. This, of course, lends itself heavily towards fake news and misinformation being spread by them.
From there, we dove into specific examples of the misinformation that has been spread in the past decade and discovered how that misinformation usually takes the form of anti-science and anti-government narratives. This trend of distrust toward public institutions has proven immensely detrimental to our society and can likely be linked to hundreds, if not thousands, of detrimental outcomes in real life, from inhibiting FEMA's hurricane relief operations all the way to death by preventable diseases.
And lastly, we discussed the possible solutions to our problems with recommendation algorithms. Corporate, governmental, and societal intervention all have a potential role to play in this battle. But if we only ever provide band-aid solutions, then misinformation will continue to thrive in our online spaces. Ultimately, we believe that an educational focus on media literacy and critical thinking would be the most effective method to de-viralizing misinformation. Another possible solution involves a greater degree of information auditing and barriers to posting by social media companies. A slower, more methodical news cycle that returns power to journalists and academics would probably be a net benefit to both those professions and society at large. It will take time, and to be honest, would be incredibly difficult to implement at scale given the current US government's fanaticism over destroying our education and journalistic systems, but we are certain that at some point the truth will prevail. This has been the final episode of the Tech Justice Podcast miniseries, Recommended Lies.
If you have time, we highly encourage you to fill out a quick survey, the link of which is in the description of this video. This podcast was created by Murat Aja and Jaden Yeager for the Tech Justice class.
If you like what you hear, please consider supporting us on Patreon for just a few bucks. You'll get access to nothing, but I'd really appreciate that free money.
This podcast was edited by Jaden and Murat.
And it was written and produced by Murat and Jaden.
Thank you for listening to this episode. You'll hear us again in the next one.